To Indiana Landmark Center. I'm Suzanne Stanis. I'm the Vice President of Education, and we are happy to have you here. And thank goodness for Dr. Glass, because were it not for him and his lectures, I think I wouldn't see so many of you. So I always feel like this is a reunion of the old Preservation Guard when we get together. So we're glad you could join us. And following the talk, Dr. Glass will be in the lobby signing his new book, Volume 2, and we also have copies of Volume 1. So we hope you'll pick that up if you haven't gotten that already. So just a couple of instructions for our audience on Zoom. Welcome. We will be taking questions as we have time, as it permits. So for the people on Zoom, if you would like to type in your question in the Q&A box, we'll do our best to get to those. And as for the audience, when we go through the questions, we ask that you wait until we have someone there with a microphone so that the Zoom audience can hear it. So again, welcome. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Brad Ward, the president of Indiana Landmarks.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne, and welcome everyone. Welcome. If is this anyone first time joining us here in the Grand Hall? Okay, all right. We have a few. Thank you. First of all, welcome to the Grand Hall. For those of you who don't know, this is the former home of the Central Avenue United Methodist Church, and the restoration of this particular place, this Romanesque revival style building, I think exemplifies our mission probably to its core. It certainly it to help people reimagine, rescue, and revive meaningful places cannot be more elegantly stated than having a seat right in here. So we want to welcome you to the Grand Hall. And if it's not your first time, perhaps it's your first time to meet me. And so I apologize if I didn't get the chance to have a direct interaction with you, but I'm delighted to be here. As Suzanne said, Brad Ward, president. My job is not only to welcome you, it is to provide you a cautionary note about what you're about to hear. I believe that what Dr. Glass has to share with us is a little bit of an occupational hazard. And what I mean by this is that as you start to take in all of these skyscrapers, you will find yourself looking up. And you might also find yourself still moving forward. And as a good friend and a good supporter of Landmark said, Frank the Seal said, I got so caught up in taking a look up that I found myself tripping right over my own feet. And to a quick, response, his wife said, "Is the camera okay?" So, heed to the caution as you make your way around this wonderful city of ours and explore what Dr. Glass has to share with us. If you don't know, Indiana Landmarks is one of the largest statewide historic preservation organizations in the United States. And what makes it so impressive and so successful is the fact that we also have over 6,000 members who support this organization. How many of you are members out there? Ah, look at that. That's very generous. So give yourselves a round of applause because you're all the ones that make this all possible. So it's no surprise we do quite a lot here at Landmarks, and one of them that is most enjoyable is when we get the opportunity to do some significant education opportunities with esteemed guests. So before I get Dr. Glass up here, I want to bring up one more esteemed colleague, and that is my wonderful mentor for a whole 15 days, right, Marsh? You had to distill 20 years of service down to 15 days, but I'm delighted to have our former president and CEO, Marsh Davis, to join us.
Mr. President, what a great crowd. Wonderful to see you all. We know that this is a short hour, it goes fast, so I will do a brief introduction to Dr. Glass. But I must ask, how many of you, is this your first Jim Glass lecture? Okay, well, you are in for a treat. The rest of you know what you're in for, and that's why you're here, because it's been a great. So it's my honor to introduce my esteemed colleague and friend, Dr. James A. Glass. And these programs have really become part of the cultural life of our city. In fact, one distinguished member who was a very high position said these programs are the highlight of his year. So, and that was a sincere compliment. So a quick biographic note on Dr. Glass, for those of you who are not familiar with him, he is principal of Historic Preservation and Heritage Consulting, LLC. He has served twice as the director of the Indiana Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology. And for 13 years, he ran the Historic Preservation Program at Ball State University's College of Architecture and Planning, and there he established the Center for Historic Preservation. He has served on the Indiana Landmarks Board and as an advisor to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. He has an extensive educational pedigree, which I shall go through quickly, a PhD in Architectural History and Historic Preservation from Cornell University, a Master of Arts at Cornell in the History of Urban Development, a Master of Arts in Latin American History from Indiana University, a Bachelor of Arts in History and Spanish from the University of Indianapolis. And I think before that you got a GED, right? Is that just But a recent highlight of Jim's storied career is the publication of his 2-volume masterpiece, Architecture in Indianapolis, 1820 to 1920. Suzanne mentioned it earlier. This is 2 volumes. So volume 2 is hot off the press. So please take a look at that book. If you don't have it, I highly recommend it to you. It's a major accomplishment and a must-have for all who are seriously interested in Indianapolis history and architecture. Both volumes are available for sale and for signing out in the lobby. Since 2013, Jim has presented these acclaimed public lectures, some on world architecture, based on his widespread travels throughout the world. These lectures attract enthusiastic followers, and I imagine a bunch of them are here tonight to hear this program. 2 things that are off the official biography of Dr. Glass. Number one, Sharon Gamble informed me that Jim has been a member of Indiana Landmarks since 1976. Anybody else been a member longer? I think you got the record, man. But also, and very importantly, after many years of great luncheon meetings with Jim, and most recently over dinner with Jim in New Harmony, came to the realization that Jim Glass knows more about the historic preservation movement in America and Indiana than any other living soul. And that's true. If you don't believe me, but we can settle out in the alley afterwards. I'm going to dispute it. But I think I can say that on good authority from all these conversations. And it's very important because he recalls the events and the names of the people who shaped this movement long before our time. And sadly, these names are largely forgotten now. So the knowledge that Jim bears is very important, and perhaps that will be a subject of a future lecture. I certainly hope so. But tonight, it's skyscrapers. So buckle up. A Jim Glass lecture is a short ride and a fast machine. So please welcome the esteemed scholar and preservation leader, Dr. James A. Glass.
Okay, I'm prepared for sound. Back row, how are we doing? Okay, good. Thank you, Marsh, for that really a nice introduction, a little over the top, I seem to say. But thank you for all of your support for the book. And Marsh read all the manuscript over the past 5.5 years and gave me much valuable criticism and advice. Much appreciated. And thank you, Brad. Where do you go? Okay, Brad, thank you for your very nice comments and introduction, and for Indiana Landmark support of the book and for these lectures. And also I want to express my gratitude to Suzanne Stanis and the staff at Landmarks for all the help with arrangements and also selling the books. Our topic then tonight is skyscrapers in Indianapolis. And what will we be talking about tonight? We're going to be talking about these topics. We're going to begin with pre-skyscrapers in the United States from 1850 to 75. Then we'll turn our attention to the first American skyscrapers between about 1884 and 1891. Then we're going to turn to something I'm calling the tripartite formula for skyscraper designs during the 1890s, followed by the first Indianapolis skyscrapers between 1892 and 1905. Then mature tripartite skyscrapers in Indianapolis over a 25-year period, 1905 to 30. Next, what I'm calling skyscraper setbacks in the 1920s, then glass towers part 1, 1952 to 65 after World War II, Next, towers in the park in Indianapolis between 1962 to 71, followed by glass towers part 2, 1968 to 75, and finally stone towers in Indianapolis during the 1980s. Now you say, what is the definition of a skyscraper? Well, these are 4 points which I derived from the work of architectural historians Winston Wiseman and Carl Condit. First of all, it had to have an above average height for its time. It had to have the use of a passenger elevator to get people up to the higher stories. It had to have the use of an iron or steel structure. And then finally, it had to have curtain wall construction, which means that the exterior wall was not load bearing. So let's keep these 4 points in mind. And as in previous presentations I've given, if you see a plus or cross beside the name of a building, it means it's a demolished building. So then let's begin with pre-skyscrapers in the United States, 1850 to 75. And we're going to begin with the Jane Building in Philadelphia, built between 1849 to 52, designed by William Johnston. This building was 10 stories, so it met one of the criteria, definitely above average height for its time. However, no passenger elevator. Can you imagine the tenants climbing those stairs, the top floor? It also did not have a iron skeleton. It had a cast iron columns and wooden braces, so it didn't meet that criteria. And it had masonry load-bearing exterior walls, so it didn't meet the fourth criterion, but it did have the height. Next, let's go to New York in the 1850s, the Hogwatt Building, designed by John Gaynor. Now, Gaynor gave this a cast iron facade, but the walls, exterior walls, were load-bearing. Also, it's not of exceptional height. It's only 5 stories. It was only 5 stories tall, but it did have a passenger elevator, so it's one of the 4 criteria. Then let's go to the Harper Brothers Building in New York, built in 1854, designed and fabricated by James Bogardus. And in this case, we're seeing a section drawing which shows that he did use a totally iron skeleton. You can see the cast iron columns and these wrought iron beams supporting the structure. However, the exterior walls were self-supporting, had a load-bearing capability, so they were not curtain walls, and there was no passenger elevator. Now, as late as early in the 1870s in Indianapolis, office buildings were being built without any of the skyscraper principles. We look at this fine building, Hubbard's Block, it stood at Washington and Meridian Street, built in 1872, designed by Diedrich Bohlen. Bohlen designed this building. It was only 4 stories tall, so it doesn't meet that criteria. The interior structure was probably cast iron columns and wooden beams, and the exterior envelope was masonry load-bearing walls. So you did give it a cast iron facade for whatever that's worth. Now, some authorities consider the Equitable Life Assurance Building in New York of 1868 to 70 to be the first skyscraper, namely because of its height. It was 130 feet tall, which was about twice the height of most of the office buildings in Manhattan at that time. And it had a passenger elevator. It exploited that, which got the tenants up to the 10th floor. However, the interior structure may not have been totally iron structure, and the exterior walls were probably still masonry load-bearing. Now, 5 years later, following the example of the Equitable Life Assurance Building, this building went up in New York, the Tribune Building, built between 1873 and 75 and designed by the noted architect Richard Morris Hunt. This building was 260 feet tall, much higher than the 130 feet of the Equitable Life Assurance Building. So it met that criteria with flying colors. It had a passenger elevator, but probably, again, the interior structure was not totally iron, and I doubt that the exterior envelope did not have some masonry load-bearing capability. Now let's come back to Indianapolis for an innovation leading towards a skyscraper. The Fletcher and Sharp block in Indianapolis, built in 1875 to 76, stood at Washington and Pennsylvania Street. Designed by William LeBaron Jenney of Chicago, who was later to become known as the father of the skyscraper. Well, he came to Indianapolis and designed this building. He used structural iron, cast iron columns and wrought iron beams for the interior structure, which also supported the exterior envelope, the exterior walls. So these were some of the first curtain walls used. However, the height is only 4 stories, so it doesn't meet the height criterion. And I doubt that they had a passenger elevator. The other thing I want to note about this is because these exterior walls were not masonry load-bearing, they were much thinner, And so he could streamline the masonry bulk and create these rectangular windows that let in much more natural light. Also, very few ornamentation, which is another innovation that Jenny made with this building. So the very nice limestone exterior. So let's keep this in mind as we go forward. This brings us to the first American skyscrapers from between about 1884 and 1891. And is widely conceded that the first skyscraper in the United States was the Home Insurance Building in Chicago, built in 1884 and 85 and designed by William LeBaron Jenney, who was trained both as an architect and engineer. And in this building, he used a totally iron and steel skeleton. It was the first office building to have steel. And cast iron columns, wrought iron box columns, all linked together by wrought iron and steel beams above the 6th floor. And the interior structure not only supported the weight of the interior building, but also supported the weight of the exterior envelope. So this was truly a curtain wall, 10 stories high, so it met the height criteria, and it had passenger elevators, so it met all 4 criteria of the skyscraper that we've set. Also notice that the implication of this is a streamlined, again, masonry envelope with an abundance of these rectangular windows, which let in much more natural light. Now, to look at the implications, another path that might have been taken if Jenny's innovations hadn't taken hold, and look at the Monadnock building in Chicago, built between about 5 years later, 1889 to 1891, designed by Burnham and Root. The client in this case, despite the fact that many buildings were being built with the steel skeleton, the client wanted for the 16 stories to be a masonry load-bearing building. So the architects obliged, and you can see how much it had to bulge out at the street level in order to accommodate a 6-foot thick wall. Almost about the same time, a year or two later, Jenney continued his innovations for the skyscraper with the Fair Store building of 1890 to 91. We're looking at a drawing here. It had a steel and iron skeleton. It had a curtain wall exterior. And here was another one of the innovations of Jenney. He instituted a fireproofing technique, which was very effective. Prior to this, they had to concern themselves that steel or even iron or even steel would melt at high temperatures in fire. So what to do? Well, Jenney, if you look at this diagram from the Fair Store building, he used terracotta as a fireproofing coating for the steel columns and the wrought iron and the steel beams and girders, and also concrete as a coating between the floors. Now we're ready to talk about the tripartite formula for skyscraper designs, which appeared during the 1890s. The term tripartite formula was coined by an architectural critic, Montgomery Schuyler, in 1899. He referred to many of the skyscrapers of the 1890s had 3 parts to their design, which he said sort of roughly corresponded to the parts of a classical column: base, shaft, and capital. And Jenney continued to make contributions in this regard. Here is his second Leiter building in Chicago, built about the same time as the Fair Store building. And this had a totally steel skeleton. And I think, again, you can see the implications of streamlining this masonry envelope because it no longer had a load-bearing capability. So he could place these banks of rectangular windows, which had let in an abundance of natural light. He also was making an innovation for the tripartite formula. The base section is these first 2 stories rising to the string course. Then you have a shaft section, which goes up to the tops of these colossal pilasters. And then the capital section is the frieze and the projecting cornice. Now, one of Jenney's chief competitors was the architectural firm of Adler and Sullivan in Chicago, Louis Sullivan being the chief designer. And they made their own refinements for the skyscraper with the Wainwright building in St. Louis, built about the same time as several of Jenney's buildings. And the building was built with braced steel skeleton, has a curtain wall exterior. And compositionally, if you look at the base section, these first 2 stories, a red sandstone, and above this string course, a red brick shaft going up to this string course, above which is this intricate frieze made of ornamental terracotta design, and finally a projecting cornice. So they had a clearly defined tripartite formula they used in this building. And then back in Chicago, one of the competitors, the other 2 firms, was a major firm, Halliburton and Roche. And they articulated the tripartite form very well with the Marquette Building of 1893 to 94. You can see the three parts of this building. The first two stories are the base section up to this string course. And then you have a series of stories comprising the shaft section up to this string course, and then a final story and a projecting Italian Renaissance cornice comprising the capital section. Now we're ready to talk about the first Indianapolis skyscrapers between about 1892 and 1905. And it could be that this building was the first, the Commercial Club building. Commercial Club was the forerunner of today's Indy Chamber. And the Commercial Club built this building at Meridian and Pearl Street between 1892 and 93. The situation here was the Commercial Clubs hired William R. Ware, the head of the architecture department at Columbia University, as their architectural advisor, who also supervised an architectural competition for the design of this building. Ware came up with a conceptual design for the building and supervised the competition, which was won by local architects Vonnegut and Bode. Bernard Vonnegut was probably the chief designer. And in this building, if it is the case at this date that it had an iron and steel skeleton, that it met one of the criteria, if that skeleton supported entirely the load of this exterior envelope, then it met a second and third criterion. It did have met the height criteria. It was about 8 stories tall. If, however, some of those elements were not present, then it was not quite there. Vonnegut then used, you can read his design as a tripartite composition with the first 2 stories, rock-faced stone with this Romanesque arch. Then above this string course, a dressed limestone section, the shaft section rising to these capitals. And then above that string course, we have the capital section comprised of a arcade. And then this wonderful pyramidal roof with these dormer windows adapted from Renaissance chateaus in the Loire Valley of France in the 16th century. Widely conceded to be the first skyscraper in Indianapolis, it was the Majestic Building at 47 South Pennsylvania Street, built between 1894 and 95 and designed by this man, Oscar Bolin, of the architectural firm D.A. Bolin. Now, the Bolin family maintained that the Majestic Building was the first skyscraper structure west of the Alleghenies except for Chicago. They also said it had the first skeleton structure. Now, we just saw the Wainwright Building in St. Louis, so we have to sort of discount the generalization of all west of the Alleghenies except for Chicago. However, nonetheless, this tall 10-story building was one of the very first, if not the first, skyscrapers in Indianapolis and perhaps in the state of Indiana. The building had a steel skeleton by this point, and the exterior envelope was curtain wall construction, Indiana limestone. In terms of reading the composition, you can read it 2 ways. You can read it as a tripartite composition with the first 2 stories rising to the string course, above which we have a shaft section reaching to this second string course, and then finally a capital section comprised of 3 stories. Or you can read it as a unitary design based on Romanesque arches. The first 2 Romanesque arches here, and then just below the string course, you have these horseshoe-shaped arches, and then trios of arches on either side. And then finally, this Italian Renaissance cornice projecting out. Now, if you look at the building today, you can see what the sparkling difference that the Indiana limestone makes. Unfortunately, at the very top, at some point in the past, the original cornice was removed. And then Bolin provided these delightful entryways on the street level, Romanesque arches with these paired Corinthian columns, and then these intricate organic low bas-relief sculptures for the arch and the voussoirs, and then this panel above. Now, no sooner said the Majestic Building been finished, that another 10-story building was built downtown Indianapolis. This was the Lemke Building at Market and Pennsylvania Street, built in 1895-96. Designed by the local architecture firm R.P. Daggett and Company. This building had a steel skeleton. It had a curtain wall exterior. I'm sure it had a passenger elevator, and it had a height of 10 stories. It has a 2-part composition, not a tripartite, but 2-part. You see the 2 parts going up to this string course. And these first 4 or 5 stories are very much like the home insurance exterior, with these rectangular windows, trios of rectangular windows between piers, streamlined, very little ornamentation. However, the architects above this top string course, or this string course rather, had a Romanesque design with a very different kind of aesthetic with these big Romanesque arches and the arcade of Romanesque arches above. Now, very soon after that, the first skyscraper in Indianapolis that really truly followed the tripart design arose at 15 to 23 East Washington Street. This was the Stevenson Building. The owner of this building, William E. Stevenson, was a real estate entrepreneur, and he hired Henry Ives Cobb of Chicago, one of the top architects there, and also head of one of the largest architecture firms in the country at the time. And it's interesting that Cobb previously in Chicago in the 1890s had designed several office buildings without tripartite compositions. Here in Indianapolis, he designed one that clearly has tripartite design, and it's interesting to contemplate whether this was in fact his first tripartite composition. It had a steel skeleton with curtain walls 12 to 15 inches thick, so not all curtain walls were paper thin. And for fireproofing, he used both terracotta and cement between the floors. In terms of composition, if you look at the base section, these first two stories, they were graced by colossal pilasters with terracotta coatings. Then we have a transitional story going up to the shaft section, then up to this top string course, above which are two stories comprising with the cornice, the capital section, the cornice being Italian Renaissance in style. Another delightful skyscraper built just after the Stevenson Building completion was the Law Building at 130 to 36 East Market Street. The story of this building was the proprietors and the investors noted the presence of a large number of lawyers on Market Streets between the old county courthouse and the federal courthouse. So they thought there would be a market for an office building particularly geared for lawyers, call it the Law Building. And the investors hired the very artistic inclined local architect Lewis H. Gibson to design this. Now there's several interesting things about this design. One is it had a steel skeleton, and look at how streamlined and attenuated the curtain wall is by this point. These trios of windows going up the facade. Secondly, if you can sort of mentally subtract this balcony from your mind, you can see there's no trace of a tripartite composition. This is a unitary design with the same basic design for all the stories up to the very top. And then third, this is a very artistic design, because what Gibson did, he went up to the Indianapolis Central Canal and noticed arrow lily plants growing there. And so he copied three different variations of the design and applied them in terracotta blocks to the entire facade, sort of an artistic tour de force you can see on the piers. These arrow lily plants, and then on the mullions, more of these in terracotta. Now, alas, in the 1970s, the owners at that time stripped off the arrow lily plant facade and put on this modernist facade with these vertical glass panels and masonry piers. Now, the final building skyscraper we're going to talk about in this initial phase is the Traction Terminal Office Building that stood at Market and Illinois Street. The story of this is that Indianapolis, by 1903, was the largest hub of the electric interurban network in the United States. And the syndicate that owned this desired to build a large train shed for the interurban trains and also an office building. So they hired another of the top architectural firms in Chicago, really a national firm, Daniel H. Burnham and Company, to design this. The office building, 9 stories tall, had a steel skeleton with a curtain wall exterior. And this building was not a tripartite, but another two-part composition. If you look at the lower 2 stories, this is the base section with a limestone exterior, this monumental Romanesque entryway, and then a transitional story, and then this upper section of reddish brown brick rising to this arcade, these colossal Romanesque arches, and then an Italian Renaissance cornice. Now, this brings us to what I'm calling mature tripartite skyscrapers in Indianapolis in the 25-year period between 1905 and 1930. And I think you'll agree that this one shows clearly the denotations of the tripartite concept. This was the Knights of Pythias building that stood at 219 North Pennsylvania Street, built in 1905 to 7 and designed by J.F. Alexander and son of Lafayette. The Knights of Pythias were one of the top 3 fraternal orders in Indiana. They desired to have a prominent office building downtown, in which they could have their lodge meetings on the top floor, and have space for their own offices, and then rent out space in the building. The architects found themselves designing a Flatiron building, a triangular shaped building, because one side, the south side, was along one of the four diagonals of the downtown plan, namely Massachusetts Avenue. The design is clearly tripartite. You have these colossal pilasters coming up to a frieze and a cornice for the base section. Then a shaft section. This is all covered with a veneer of Indiana limestone up to this string course. And then finally, the 10th floor where the lodge meeting auditorium was, and this cartouche, above which was this immensely projecting cornice with the supported by modillions. Now, just a year or two after the completion of the Knights of Pythias building, a competing fraternal order, the Independent Order of Oddfellows, decided to build their office building downtown Indianapolis at Pennsylvania Street and Washington Street. And they hired up-and-coming architecture firm, Indianapolis architecture firm, Rubush and Hunter. And this building was built in 1978, 14 stories high. So for a very short time, it was the tallest building in the city. The architects used a steel skeleton, a limestone veneer curtain wall for the exterior. A clear example of tripartite composition with the first two stories rising to this cornice. Then a transitional story to the shaft section, all Indiana limestone to this string course, above which on the 13th floor were these immense arched windows casting natural light onto the auditorium, the Oddfellows, and finally a Renaissance-style cornice. This brings us to the undisputed tallest building in the city and the state for about 50 years. This was the Merchants National Bank building, now Barnes and Thornburg, that was constructed at Meridian and Washington Street, built between 1907 and 12. The situation here was the Merchants National Bank, one of the prominent banks, wanted a symbol of their financial solidity. And what better way to do that than to build a 16-story building at the center of the city? And they brought back Daniel H. Burnham and Company to design it, 16 stories. And we see the early rendering by Burnham of the building. If we take a look at the building today, we can see how color plays a part in the composition. With the three-part, this is a clear example of tripartite design with a white limestone base section, a transitional story of limestone, a shaft section of pressed red Catanic brick, and then limestone at the very top. The building was built by Burnham with a steel skeleton embedded in concrete and a 12 to 15-inch curtain wall on the exterior, brick and limestone. And also, Burnham's engineer braced the girders to contend with the wind, which you have to consider when you're building a building of this high. The tower section of this building was built in two parts. The tower section was supervised by Howard Dwight of Burnham's staff. And let's take a closer look at the three parts. The base section with these colossal limestone Doric columns, and then the transitional story with these blind shields. And then above the shaft section, we have this 16-story Indiana limestone with these intricate shields, and then these horizontal windows. And then above that, projecting cornice with modillions and egg and dart molding. Now, the other section of the building, which was built actually first before the tower, was the banking room, the banking offices. And this was supervised by Fred Williamson, another architect on Burnham's staff. You can see the majestic quality of this two-story high space with these Greek Doric colossal columns with green Georgia marble at the base sections. And then from Roman architecture, you have these rectangular coffers. Now, just a year or two after the Merchants National Bank building was completed, another banking company decided to build their 16-story building for advertisement of their acumen and financial affairs. This was the Fletcher Savings and Trust Company. They bought a site at Market and Pennsylvania Street. In 1913, they hired Warren P. Laird, the Dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, to be their architectural advisor and to supervise a national architectural competition for the design of this building. The competition was won by New York architect Electus Litchfield. Litchfield came to Indianapolis to meet with the board of directors, and then just a matter of weeks or months later, the board fired him and replaced him with a local architecture firm, Vonnegut and Bohm, who completed design and supervised construction. We see the final result here. Steel skeleton with a stone curtain wall exterior. Also notice we have a clearly denoted tripartite composition. The base section with these colossal ionic columns standing in Annis on this Market Street side. On the Pennsylvania Street side, we have colossal ionic pilasters, a transitional story. Then above this string course, we have the shaft section going up to this string course. And finally, these colossal pilasters spanning 2 stories and then an Italian Renaissance cornice. Now, color plays a role in this building's exterior design also. The board of directors picked pink Crotch Island granite from Maine for the first 3 stories. You can see this pink quality here going up to the 3rd story. Above this string course, they picked a warm colored Indiana limestone for the remainder of the building, a very nice combination. And then about the time that building was being finished in 1915, Henry Kahn, the owner of the Kahn Tailoring Company, decided to build an office building, a skyscraper, at the heart of the downtown at Meridian and Washington Street, and hired Vonnegut and Bone to design it. The thing we want to look particularly at this building is the cladding material in this case is entirely terracotta. It's a versatile baked clay that could assume any number of types of decorative forms. And so in this case, the architects encased the piers with cream-colored terracotta and the spandrel panels in green terracotta. Also, it follows the tripartite design, the first 2 stories, the base section, then the shaft section, and then finally a capital section at the very top. There was a hiatus in construction domestically, nationally, across the country and in Indianapolis during World War I, 1917 to 1918. But after World War I, very soon after that, 2 new state banks in Indianapolis decided to build their own skyscraper symbols. The first one we'll look at is the National City Bank building, built at stood and stands at 108 to 10 East Washington Street, built between 1921 and 22 and designed by the Hodgson brothers of New York. And what they designed was a 14-story skyscraper for their banking clients. It had a steel skeleton, concrete floors, concrete roof, and curtain walls, and it certainly abided by the tripartite concept. We have a base section here going up to this cornice, and then a shaft section of the brick, and then another string course, and the more colossal pilasters up in this section with a slightly projecting cornice. And take a closer look at the base section with these delightful and well-proportioned Corinthian pilasters and the central archway in the middle. This is what the building looks like today. You can see that the base section several times the materials have been changed. It now currently has a pink granite surface for it. And also notice at the top that at some point in the past, the cornice has been removed. This has been rehabilitated as condos. Right behind it on Market Street, the other state bank, J.F. Wild and Company, built their building at 123 to 129 East Market Street in 1922 and hired a local architect firm Mercanna to design it. The building had a structural steel skeleton, concrete floors and roof, and a limestone facade. And you can see clearly the tripartite formula at work here with these colossal pilasters, a cornice, and then the shaft section, which has bronze spandrels, some of which have lion's head sculptures. And then if you go to the very top to the capital section, you can see the Italian Renaissance cornice and these bas-relief, low-relief sculptures called vegetative candelabra, going back to the Italian Renaissance. And this sculpture may have been executed by the prolific local sculptor Alexander Sanger-Nebo. This brings us to what I'm calling skyscraper setbacks during the 1920s. It so happened by the 19-teens that some people in the largest cities, New York and Chicago in particular, were becoming concerned that all these tall skyscrapers with these large masses was blocking sunshine and fresh light, fresh air from the lower reaches of the cities. What to do? Well, the New York City zoning ordinance of 1916, the first one in the United States, addressed this and created restrictions on skyscraper designs based on the idea that the base section of any skyscraper could only covering the entire lot could only go up to a certain height, and above that, there had to be a series of terraces or setbacks reducing the mass of the building. This leads us to the Chicago Tribune building competition of early 1920s. In that competition, a Finnish architect, Elio Saarinen, entered the competition and came up with this design we see here. Interestingly enough, this became very popular and very influential among architects in the 1920s, but it didn't win first prize. But nonetheless, let's take a look at it. Saarinen has covered the entire site up to this level At this level, he has contracted the width of the tower and also instituted a depth recession, and then done that several times, creating these terraces and finally culminating in the square tower. He also used abstracted Gothic buttresses for the upper stages to sort of give it the silhouette of a Gothic cathedral tower. Almost immediately, New York architect Raymond Hood designed a radiator building in New York using the concepts of Saarinen. You see that this level, it covers the entire site, and then the tower contracts, and it also has a depth recession, and then several terraces rising to this gilded crown. Now, if you go back to Indianapolis, a much shorter building, only 9 stories, you can see some of the influence of either the Radiator Building or Saarinen's building. In the Chamber of Commerce building at 320 or North Meridian Street, built in 1926 and designed by Robert Frost Daggett and his associate Thomas Hibben. And sure enough, we look at the first 2 stories, it covers the entire lot, but then it contracts at the 3rd story, and the shaft section goes up to this level, and then we have another contraction and more depth recessions. If we look at the top, we can see more of the detail of the contraction and the depth recession, but also notice these abstracted Gothic buttresses at the very top. And then if we go down a little bit further, we see these Gothic panels and these delightful gargoyles, which may have been sculpted by Alexander Sanger-Nebo. This brings us to one of the chief buildings in Indianapolis, exemplifying the setback principle, built in the end of the 1920s, and namely the Circle Tower. Now, the story in Indianapolis was a little different in terms of setback. The main concern in Indianapolis was a monument circle that new office buildings would overwhelm or compete with the Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Monument. Therefore, in the first Indianapolis zoning ordinance of 1922, provision was made to restrict the heights on Monument Circle. And this Circle Tower, designed by Rubish and Hunter, exemplifies one of the more creative approaches. The ordinance said that any building built in the circle in the facade line could go no higher than 108 feet tall. And then above that, it had to be terraces, not covering the entire space of the base section. The Circle Tower exemplifies this principles admirably. The first 10 stories go up to 108 feet tall, and then there's a recession and series of terraces contracted, rising to this crown. If we take a look at the monument looking down, we can see how the base section, 108 feet tall, covers the entire lot and then indeed contracts. Also notice that you can see these terraces that are contracting and rising, stylized up to this crown, a little bit like the terraces on ziggurats in ancient Sumeria 4,000 years ago. If we take another look at this, we can see the terraces and these abstracted sculptures, which come out of the Art Deco realm of the 1920s, that include, some of these include Egyptian motifs. If you want to see more Egyptian motifs, go down to the grand entryway to this building. You'll see this bronze grill of Egyptian workers created by local sculptor Joseph Willenborg, and then this wonderful frieze, bas-relief frieze, which includes other Egyptian motifs. And you owe it to yourself to go into the lobby, because you will then be dazzled by these bronze doors with these Egyptian workers in these medallions, and then marbleized marble covering for the walls, and then the terrazzo floor. This brings us to what I'm calling Glass Towers Part 1. After World War II, 1952 to 65, there was very little construction during the Depression of the 1930s and during World War II. And the model for the glass curtain wall towers came out of an art school, the Bauhaus Art School in Dessau, Germany in the 1920s. And one of the primary factors in that school was Walter Gropius. This shows his design for one of the buildings there, the Workshops building, and shows his concept of the glass curtain wall. You see inside this transparent exterior. You can see inside the reinforced concrete structure. The exterior is a curtain wall, but it's made entirely out of glass, transparent glass with this steel framework, very different than the masonry curtain walls we've been looking at. Well, after World War II, this caught the imagination of corporate America for many corporate skyscrapers. And one of the first of these was the Lever House in New York, built in 1952 and designed by the up-and-coming architecture firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. In this case, most of the mass of the building is in this rectangular slab or box with this homogenized glass curtain wall exterior. You have got glass for the windows, and then spandrel panels, which are darker, which blend into with the glass to create a homogeneous surface with a steel framework. The second story level, you have an elevated second story with a terrace with green grass and trees for the enjoyment of the employees, all standing on columns. Just a couple blocks away, another very influential glass curtain wall building, the Seagram's building, this was both of them on Park Avenue, built in 1954 to 58, and designed by the master of the glass curtain wall, Mies van der Rohe, and his associate Philip Johnson. In the Seagram building, you would have another slab or rectangular box with a homogeneous glass curtain wall with spandrels and glass fit into a framework of bronze network. Also notice what a small part of the lot that the skyscraper fits into. This Mies then created a plaza at the base, which let in sunlight and fresh air. And then notice also that the first story wall is recessed and columns standing on the exterior. If we go to Indianapolis, one of the first glass curtain wall boxes of this type you can find on Fall Creek Parkway, the former Standard Life Insurance Company building, now the Julia Carson Governmental Center at 300 East Fall Creek Parkway. The Standard Life Insurance Company back in 1945 had hired Skidmore, Merrill to build a small limestone building. In 1956, the head of the Standard Life Insurance Company, Harry Wade, called his good friend Nathaniel Owings, one of the partners of Skidmore, Merrill, said, "Wouldn't you please design a modern addition to my building?" And this was the result. But unlike the Lever House, Skidmore, Merrill, yes, there's a glass curtain wall, but in order to differentiate and add more interest, they applied these purely decorative aluminum piers and mullions, vertical, and then there are a few horizontal aluminum elements to create more interest. They extended this idea of using aluminum even more in the Fidelity building that they designed at the end of the 1950s, a Monument Circle. You can see, yes, there's a glass curtain wall, but it's almost completely obscured by the aluminum. These decorative aluminum piers, aluminum mullions, and then cross aluminum beams, creating a grid across the facade. Now, finally, in 1962, 60 to 62, the first true glass curtain wall tower happened in Indianapolis. This was the City County building at Washington and Delaware Street. It actually had been designed, it actually started in 1953. The construction took place between 1960 to 62. It was designed by Lennox, Simmons, Matthews, and Ford in collaboration with Wright, Porteous, and Lowe. Now, the centerpiece of this is a 26-story tower following the example of the Seagram building. It's a rectangular slab of a box with a homogeneous facade, glass and spandrel panels and a steel network. And then on either side, the architects designed these much lower 5-story buildings to accommodate the police wing and the courts wing, and clad this with limestone for contrast. If you take a look at this 1964 aerial photo, you can appreciate what a dramatic visual impact this made on the downtown at that time, most of which had buildings that were only 4 to 5 stories tall. Also notice that like Mies with his plaza at the base of the Seagram's building, the architects created a large plaza at the base of this building and then created these elevated beds of grass and shrubbery to create some sculpted landscape design. Now we look at the north side, we can see that there is an unusual structure which is apart from the tower. This is the structure for the public assembly room. And the architects created an elevated box with limestone slabs with these purely decorative aluminum piers to add architectural interest. And then if we take a look at the base section, we can see that the facade is recessed and has these square aluminum columns, somewhat like the Seagram's building. Inside, if you go inside, you can see fine materials were used. We got this hardwood wall here on the section of the elevator bank, white marble slabs and panels, and then granite floors. Now we're ready to talk about something I'm calling Towers in the Park in Indianapolis between 1962 to 71. And this goes back to a vision by the famed French modernist architect Le Corbusier. This was his 1923 drawing of a contemporary city outside of Paris for 3 million people. And Le Corbusier's idea was to build tall skyscraper towers, enough presumably to house 3 million people, and then around them to create an abundance of open space, green grass and trees for recreation, and let much natural light and fresh air into the complex. Well, this caught the imagination of many architects, particularly after World War II, and also was much emulated in the Federal Urban Renewal Program of the 1950s and 60s. And if we come to Indianapolis, you can see its urban renewal program, part of its urban renewal program involved the clearance of an area called Project H, which was the northern section of the downtown. The Indianapolis Redevelopment Authority cleared this whole site for future development. And one of their ideas was to create an apartment city. Here we see drawings of the apartment city called Riley Center Towers. 600 North Alabama Street was the address. It was the first phase was built between 1962 to 64 and designed by the noted modernist architecture firm Perkins and Will of Chicago. Now we're looking at the cover of the Indianapolis Star magazine for 1963. You can see the drawings of the architects of the two different types of towers that were to comprise this apartment city. The crown towers, 30 stories tall, two of them, and then a 16-story twin tower. This model at the base, take a closer look at it, shows how this is like the towers in the park, which is what people call Mead's concept. You have towers of different types of heights with abundance of trees and grass surrounding them. There were to be 5 crown towers of 30 stories and 8 twin towers of 16 stories. And this was to be a $40 million apartment city on a 42-acre site. Now, this is all that was built. Phase 1, the Perkins and Will designed skyscraper towers, but unlike these glass curtain walls, we have brick piers and concrete spandrels and these unusual balconies on the corners. The story here is that after phase 1 was completed, they only were able to rent about half of the apartments. And so the project stopped at that point. Now, there was actually another tower in Project H that was built. It sort of follows the towers in the park concept. This was the John J. Barton Apartments for the Elderly, built on Massachusetts Avenue between 1969 and 71, and designed by Evans Woolen and Woolen Associates. It so happened that I keep saying that, Le Corbusier, in addition to designing this contemporary city for $3 million, after World War II, he designed several buildings with totally concrete exteriors. And you can see the influence in this building. Woolen created a 21-story tower in the Project H area, with the exterior totally concrete. And then at this level, he widens the tower, these deep reveals, and creates sort of an oversized sculpture. Now, that tower is still there, but instead of having a park at the bottom, it is now encased in contemporary residential buildings. Now, this brings us to what I'm calling Glass Towers Part 2, 1968 to 75. And let's begin with the Indiana National Bank Tower, 1 Indiana Square. This was a 37-story tower, so it was the new tallest building in the city and the state, built between 1968 and 70, designed by a Dallas firm, Thomas E. Stanley, in collaboration with Wright, Porteous, and Lowe. I think you can see in this design, going back to the Lever House, we have a glass curtain wall, rectangular box or slab resting on an elevated base. There is the same kind of homogeneity with the glass windows and spandrel panels sort of blending together. But for purely decorative effect, the architects added white marble slabs to create these vertical points along the facade piers. And then at the top is white marble. And then the base section, 4 stories, is white marble. They had a terrace, like at Lever House, a terrace for grass and trees for the employees to enjoy. The next slide shows the steel skeleton as it was being built. This also reminds me to comment on the fact that this building was built on top of the first block of Massachusetts Avenue, one of the 4 diagonal avenues of the Ralston Plan. The city vacated it and condemned the block and sold it to the bank. Unfortunately for this building, due to wind and other natural hazards, the windows started popping out. and some of the white marble slabs fell. So the later owners were compelled to redesign it. So it's now more of a conventional glass curtain wall tower. And just a couple blocks west is this interesting building, the former Indiana Bell Telephone Company building, now condominiums. It stands at 220 East North Meridian Street, built in 1974-75, designed by the New York architecture firm Kahn and Jacobs in association with this local architecture firm with its extremely long name, Fleck, Burkhardt, Shropshire, Boots, and Reed Architects. In any event, this building is quite interesting because it is the surface is glass, entirely glass. Both the windows and the spandrel panels are glass, which means it has a mirror-like surface reflecting what's the weather and other elements. Also notice it has a depth recession on either side, somewhat like the setback discussion we had earlier. Also, if you look at the base section, you see something similar to the Seagram's building with a recessed first floor windows and then the exterior resting on these granite columns. And then this building does not have a whole lot of personality to it, but it does have color. Color is what it denotes. In fact, it's called the Gold Building now, originally called the Market Square Building on North Delaware Street. Built in 1975 and designed by Wright, Porteous, and Lowe. Again, the windows and the spandrel panels have a glass impregnated, I'm told, with gold dust, and so it has a mirror-like surface. This brings us finally to stone towers in Indianapolis during the 1980s. We're going to begin with this slide looking down another one of the diagonal avenues, Indiana Avenue, in the northwest section of the downtown, which culturally and commercially very important in the history of the African-American community. This slide was taken in 1979. And what happened was the city of Indianapolis collaborated with the American United Life Insurance Company to build a tower on the first block of Indiana Avenue. The city acquired the block and vacated the avenue and sold it to the life insurance company. Here we see the result. American United Life Insurance Company at 1 American Square is its address, built in 1981-82. And they brought back Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill to design it. This is not a rectangular box, is it? It is a polygon, really. It has a rectangular section in the center and these beveled sides and then a raking roof. And we look from the avenue, looking in the other direction, we can see the same kind of polygon shape here. And also the two-story section covers the entire block. And if you look at the side in the sun, you see this dazzling white Indiana limestone creating sort of a grid system on the building. Another interesting building, 300 North Meridian Street, built in 1989, designed by a second Dallas firm, Haldeman, Miller, Bregman, and Heyman. And this is a rendering by the architecture firm, which shows two interesting things. One is the pink granite is used as a wall material. Then also notice the symmetrical recession in the corners, a little bit like the setbacks we talked about earlier. And if we compare this, the facade as it appears today is symmetrical with these recessions. You can see some similarities maybe to the Radiator Building and to the Chamber of Commerce building right next door. Now let's go to the Market Square Tower at 10 West Market Street, built in 1988, designed by a third Dallas firm, Lohan Associates, in collaboration with Ratio Architects. This building is 32 stories tall. One of the things that is notable about it is the use of pink granite as the veneer material, and then this interesting panel that projects in the center, adding some architectural variety, as does this pyramidal roof with the pinnacles. And a short distance away is the 101 West Ohio Street building, built in 1987 and designed by the local architecture firm of Browning, Day, Mullins, Deardorff. Now, this is different than a glass curtain wall, isn't it? Because the architects are using ribbon windows, in between which are metal panels, which when the sun shines them look like stone panels. And then finally, 51 stories, the current holder of the tallest building in the state is the former Bank One Center, now Salesforce Tower. It has an address on Marmont Circle, but the entire tower stands on Ohio Street. Built in 1987 to 1990 and designed by Hugh Stubbins, noted architect of Stubbins Associates of Cambridge, Massachusetts. You see in the tower that Stubbins has gotten is not a rectangular box. It has a sculpted effect by the reduction as you go up. It almost terraces the shape, particularly on the corners. Take a closer look. You can see this corner treatment, adding interest to the building as it goes up. But also notice this grid system of pink granite panels affixed to the spandrels and to the pier sections of the tower. Now, unlike Mies, who created the plaza, remember at the base of the little tall tower, in this case, the architects and the bank decided to enclose, have a sense of enclosure along Ohio Street. So the base section, a four-story base section, does that. And the other thing to note about this building is the Stubbins noted that there was a large axis binding together the 5 blocks long World War Memorial Plaza in Indianapolis. And so the building tower is on that axis and is somewhat designed in order to act as sort of a visual terminus. Now, then, if we look at Indianapolis skyscraper skyline today, looking south from the Indianapolis Public Library, we see this skyscraper skyline silhouette made up mostly of skyscrapers built since World War II. Well, I hope this will inspire you to go out and see some of the surviving skyscrapers we've talked about tonight, and also give you more of an appreciation for the rich skyscraper history of Indianapolis. These are some of the sources that I use for my presentation. And these are photo credits. And as Susanna Marsh mentioned, Indiana Landmarks is selling Volume 2, which is just off the press. This is the launch event for it. It will be on sale. And also we have Volume 1 available. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I look at the arbiters of my time. We have time for some floor questions? Okay. All right. Do we have some questions? Someone in this large audience. Yes. If you could wait for the microphone for just a minute.
I was just wondering if you personally conduct tours, architectural tours or skyscraper tours downtown.
Anything's possible.
What buildings did Saarinen do in Columbus? Do you remember?
Okay, Elio Saarinen, as far as I know, designed one building in Columbus, and that was the First Christian Church. Am I right? And Marsh says that Eero Saarinen, the son, designed several other buildings. Here's someone. All right.
You mentioned that there was an architect who was given a commission and then they fired him. What, do you know the story? Why they?
I searched, Krista, I searched and searched and searched and could not find the inside story. The newspaper had these tantalizing tidbits. Who meet with board of directors. That's one tidbit, but didn't elaborate. And then there was no further follow-up in the newspaper about what happened. All of a sudden, Vonnegut and Bohn were the architects.
Regarding the tripartite design of buildings, I know you had a few of the lodges in your presentation.
I had a few of the what?
Lodges, Knights of Pythias.
Oh, yeah,
Redmond.
right, yes.
And they always had their lodge space in the top of their buildings and tall ceilings. And I'm just wondering, in many of the other examples you showed, what that tripartite section was typically used for, and was it more of a gathering event space versus office?
The only ones that I'm aware of were the fraternal lodge buildings that had, they had the auditorium on the top floor. Yeah, that's the only ones I'm aware of. I'm sure there were others in other cities, probably there were. There was the previous Scottish Rite. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a photo of the previous Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis, which was on South Pennsylvania Street. It had an elevated lodge in that tower too.
Thank you. Could you say anything about the cluster of buildings around 38th and 40th and Meridian? So I think Summit House, Tarkington Tower, and that kind of era, and what caused that?
I can't comment on the design because I haven't really studied them enough. I do know that Tarkington Towers was built in the late 1960s. And it was one of the reasons why there's a Meridian Street Preservation Commission, because they wanted to stop any more towers being built in that neighborhood. Summit Building, I think, was built probably in the late 60s also. I think that is an issue, which unfortunately in our city, we've really not paid enough attention, I think, to the value of the diagonal avenues. And of course, Indiana Avenue has some special significance in the African-American history. But I think the diagonal avenues had the potential to add a lot in terms of unusual vistas and interesting building shapes. But instead, our practice has been all too often to vacate the avenue and then create a building site of that sort.
The Hyatt PNC Center downtown, that was not mentioned in your presentation. I didn't, just curious if you have any thoughts on that structure.
Oh, the Merchants Plaza building?
Yeah.
I didn't include that because in the period of time it was built, its height was not particularly that high. I was trying to sort of focus on the tallest buildings.
Dr. Glass, could you comment on a couple of buildings here in Indianapolis more recently? Not office buildings, but hotels, the JW Marriott and the building that's going up on Pan Am Plaza.
The JW Marriott is a very nice, very fine example of glass curtain wall architecture with a curvature. Very interesting kind of shape, a little bit like the Fidelity building in the Circle I was showing. The other building I've not really seen the design of, so I can't comment on it.
You have a mic on this side. Hey, Jim, you talked about the setbacks and the relationship to the Monument Circle. And I was always under the understanding that we had an ordinance that we couldn't build anything taller than the Monument Circle until 1962 when the city county building was built. But I could be wrong there. Maybe it's just the setbacks on the circle. I don't know. And that's why we never had really much of a skyline, is my understanding, kind of like Philadelphia before.
Olin, as far as I know, the only height restrictions were on Monument Circle, which would explain why the city county building was built without any kind of restrictions.
I think we have time for one more question.
Final question?
You talked about the tripartite design and then always mentioned a transitional floor. Is there any functional reason for that, or was it only visual?
It's a very good question. I noted that. As I was doing my research and was preparing this presentation, looking at the images, I noticed that many of them have these transitional stories. I don't know why functionally that was, because I don't think that there was a special function within that would justify that. Sorry not to have a more definitive answer. Well, thank you very much, all of you.
Love to have you join us in saving meaningful places. And also check out our website for some upcoming events. We've got lots of neighborhood tours and an exciting program for Juneteenth. So thank you again, and we'll whisk Dr. Glass out to the lobby where he could sign books. Thanks.